Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Fireside with Founders and Leaders podcast. Today, I am super excited to be joined by Julia Salasky, who is CEO of a tech company called Legl. So, Legl simplifies legal operations with their market-leading technology. It's a really amazing platform that is being used by legal companies all over the world. Julia is a serial entrepreneur. So she's founded not only this business, but another company called Crowd Justice. So we'll get to talk to her about both the vision that she's had for both companies and some of the things that have made her the success that she has been up until today. We'll also talk about the legal market and how it is behind the curve with tech stack comparatively to most other places, for example, fintech. So for all this and loads more, I really hope you'll enjoy this one. Sit back and enjoy.
Hello, Julia, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for giving up your time on what is no doubt a busy schedule as always. So I thought we'd jump straight in because you've got a really sort of interesting sort of career path up until now, and have been I think a founder of a business from quite an early stage in your career as well. So I'm keen to talk about where it all started. You started off obviously in university, studying sort of various things, but including sort of the legal sector, and then getting in working with the UN. So some really interesting places where you've had some, I'm sure, interesting experience. But if you could perhaps take us through from where your interest in sort of the legal sector all started, and take us through to where you are today with Legl.
Yeah, sure. So, gosh, I think you said I started at university, but that would have made me a child prodigy, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess so. I'm from the US originally, and I came to the UK originally to do my third year of university, junior year abroad, as they say in the US. And I essentially stayed. And one of the reasons that I went into law, candidly, was because as an American, law school is so expensive and it's so long. And here, the Linklater's a big firm, was like, oh, we'll pay for your law school, which is very normal thing for firms to do here. But to me, that was like a mind-blowing thing. Someone would pay this like wildly expensive education piece. So I did that, and that's how I started. That's how I started in law, and I hadn't studied it as an undergraduate. I did the conversion course and the vocational courses that they have that Linklaters did indeed pay for, but I had studied a lot of politics, philosophy, economics, and I had always been really enamored with the idea of justice, of like cross-border problems, political, legal, however they may come. And so the UN had always been kind of high on my list as an aspirational place to work. And I took, they do these exams for young professionals, which I took, and that's how I got into the UN as a lawyer, first for doing war crimes work, and then doing international trade law. And so that's a trot through, I guess, of how I came to law and my pre-startup journey.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Very good. And by the sounds of it, a good sort of baptism into the world of sort of legal as it is, and some of the challenges that sort of are faced in the sector. So one of the things I was really interested to sort of understand is looking at that journey in terms of where you've been and to where you are now. There will have obviously been lots of challenges and lots of sort of changes that you've seen over time. So what sort of things have you seen sort of happen over the course of your career to date that have changed in sort of the legal services, specifically in the area that you're focused on?
Yeah, sure. So I guess when I first started off as a lawyer, I actually didn't really think about technology at all. It was like a completely alien topic to me. And I used the tools that were mandated at a law firm, at the UN. Similarly, I followed the path, so to speak. And I guess one of the the big project that I was working on when I left the UN was around cross-border dispute resolution online. So how do you, if you're a consumer in one country and you buy something from another country and you have a dispute, how do you resolve that online, cross-border? And the UN's view, or all of the countries that constitute the UN, are like, this is a big problem that needs solving. And I started to see that the way we were solving that at this macro level was like heavy-handed, and actually that you could think about this more from first principles around, like, actually as a consumer, how do I solve that problem? And am I going to be using some like global disputes framework, or actually am I going to be using like my credit card chargeback scheme?
Yeah.
So I guess the way that I ended up pivoting my career into tech was by trying to look at the problem in a different way. And I think, to your question around what's changed over the course of that journey, is, in a way, it's hard for me to say, because I don't know when I started out what the standard was and where it is today. I really started by looking at what are the problems that people are trying to solve. In my context and context, this big global problem of actually how do people access legal services, and starting to think about, okay, how do we change that over time? Or how do we change that in a way that makes more sense on the ground?
Yeah.
What I've seen over the last couple of years, and I think this is true of all sorts of industries, but there has been a huge learning curve in the legal space in terms of technology adoption post-COVID or during COVID or whatever. And that is, it's both a trite thing to say, but it's also, in the legal services space, this is an industry that is way behind peer industries like financial services in terms of technology, and has actually rapidly, I wouldn't say we have caught up in this industry, but we are making a lot of ground up, because for the first time, technology has actually become mission critical to how people deliver legal services in a way that pre-COVID you could kind of get away with not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've certainly seen that in terms of, in our business, the fact that legal services companies are, as you say, massively behind the curve and really now playing catch up. I think with things like sort of blockchain coming to the forefront of technology, and that for me seems like something that's really helpful and useful within sort of legal services to have things like that. So have you seen things like that, sort of, adding value to sort of, legal services, being able to implement things like sort of blockchain and the evolution of tech to really sort of make it work?
The short answer is no. And I think the reason is that law firms have been, and the legal industry has been, sufficiently far behind the technology adoption curve that the thing that's being adopted now is not highly innovative, Web3 based, buzzword based technologies. Lots of law firms talk about it, and some law firms have like experiments around small innovations there, or small projects there. But fundamentally, we're talking about people that fax things still today. We're talking about people, a lot of the firms we work with take telephone payments as like one of their primary ways. Like, this is really about digitizing a sector from the ground up. And so I think there's a lot of excitement around new technologies, but I think that's still a few years down the line. I think we're still in V1.
It seems to me, I've got a close friend who was actually away at a birthday party with her last weekend. I'll keep her name out of it, but she probably doesn't want it broadcast across everywhere. But she works in for a firm, and she is responsible for a lot of their now digital transformation and change. And one of the biggest challenges that they have is that the firm are a very old school firm, and they're not as on board with a lot of the digital advancements and technology changes. There's a lot of old school people who want to continue to do it in the way that they've done it because they don't see it as broken. So they're not investing the money into it. And that's, I suppose, a fairly common thing across the entire sector.
Absolutely. And you should give me her name so that I can sell something to her.
Yeah.
No, I think that's both the blessing and the curse, right? That's why there's a big opportunity space here. That's why there's been a slower adoption curve, because the existing structures work for people. Like, people make money out of them. It works. But I think what's become really clear to firms, both over COVID, but also because of some other economic pressures and competitive pressures, is that the firms that are going to succeed in the future are the ones that are delivering like very high quality, very transparently delivered, and very cost-effective services to people. And that's, other industries have brought that expectation in, but also I think firms have also really started leaning into client experience in a way that all other industries probably have already thought this through. But in the legal space, this is becoming quite, it's coming more to the fore. And technology assists everything from better client experience to better margins and increasing your top line. And I think there is an adoption curve there. But I think your friend's firm, like many other firms, will be somewhere on that curve. And as new generation of people come through, then some of those thoughts change. But also we see a lot of firms where there was a way of doing things and people have changed because they see the benefits that technology can bring.
Yeah, absolutely. There's got to be benefits to it, and it can't just all be about things like billable hours and this sort of, this witchcraft that is sort of legal services and legal speak to regular lay people like me who don't understand any of it. So I think that adoption is definitely sort of coming through, and it's something that we're seeing. Now, you've obviously, so as we mentioned, you've started your journey as a founder, sort of, relatively sort of quickly into your career, having had a few experiences in other places before, and then you set up your first business, which was Crowd Justice. So talk to me about that, and you're spotting sort of a gap in the market as something that was broken and looking to try and fix it.
Yeah, so it's really just a continuation of this idea that I saw that there's a lot of people trying to solve the access to justice problem. And to give a sense, there's a huge, something like 2/3 of people who need legal advice don't get it. And that's for all sorts of different reasons. But the thing that I saw as being probably most critical is the reason most people don't get it is, you called it witchcraft, which I actually think is one of the reasons people are scared of it. But the second, or they don't identify that they have a problem. But the second thing is funding, and it's expensive, and it's something where if you don't have a lot of means, you're probably not going to want to spend your disposable income on a lawyer. And so Crowd Justice was born out of this idea that there was a solution that I could see that would help more people access more legal services through telling their story, raising funds from the crowd, and enabling that person to get, or that group to get, legal advice. And the thing that was unique about Crowd Justice is funds raised go directly to lawyers' client accounts, and we automate compliance on those funds. And so it's not like, hey, I'm Joe Blogs and I think I've got a legal case. It's actually, I've spoken to a lawyer, they're willing to act for me. This is going to be something that really leverages my ability to move forward. And as a result, through Crowd Justice, something like 12 or 15 Supreme Court cases have been fully or partly funded. Lots of individuals have contributed to things that have really changed the law. I think over 700,000 people have given money and therefore been able to see, feel like they're a part of the legal system. So that was, I feel like that's hit a really important spot within the access to justice ecosystem.
Yeah, nice. And certainly it's something that I think was needed. There's as you say, it's very different to in the UK market as well, comparatively to your homeland in the States, whereby it's a more mature market over there. I believe anyway. I could be completely wrong. You might tell me that absolutely it's not, but it seems like it's a more mature market in terms of consumers using legal services over in the States comparatively to here in the UK.
I don't know if I'd use the word mature. I think it's I think the UK does really, really well. And the reason why crowd justice has been able to function effectively in the UK is because there's a lot of safeguards against taking what's called vexatious litigation. So essentially taking a legal case that doesn't really have any merit. In the US, fewer safeguards around that.
Okay.
And so there's a very much different dynamic at play, I think. And in the UK, the fact that to use crowd justice, you have to have instructed a lawyer creates a very high quality threshold. And so that's something that I think one of the UK legal system has built in a lot of safeguards that enables the system to work very effectively. So I might actually argue that things sometimes work better here.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, it sounds like it. At least we're doing something right. And so what compelled you to go from being in sort of legal services to being a tech founder effectively?
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't think of myself as a kind of a tech founder. I thought, oh, I see this problem. I feel like I could solve it. I worked, I sort of cut back to 4 days a week so that I could work on this as a project on the side. And I realized I'm a kind of an intense person, and I realized if I was gonna do this, I needed to do it properly, and that was gonna be not just Friday and a weekend. This was gonna be full time, and I time boxed a period of time, and I just threw everything at it, and then raised some money, and the rest was sort of the startup journey. But yeah, I went in very naively. Eyes were not wide open as to what it meant to be a founder, what it meant to run a company. So yeah, steep learning curve.
And you obviously, you're glutton for punishment, because not only have you done it with crowd justice, you've then gone on to set up your second tech business, which is Legl. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so what I started to see at Crowd Justice, we worked with 150, 200 law firms that actually a lot of the operational processes that they had, and we could see it very clearly because we're processing funds for them, were broken. And I am nothing if not like excited to solve other people's problems, and saw that there was like a big opportunity in that space. So started digging into it. Initially thought we would just expand the crowd justice value proposition. And then I just realized this is a very big adjacent opportunity. So launched Legl to service that opportunity. And that was about 3 years ago. And what Legl does is digitizes the back office operational processes of law firms. So everything from compliance, onboarding, payments. It's very workflow driven. So we try and use a lot of these manual processes that law firms have, which actually create bad client experiences, create like a lot of cost for the law firm, but also don't enable the law firm to really understand their client base. So they don't have, if you're doing all of this stuff manually, you don't have the data that it generates that enables you to actually understand your client base and provide them a really good experience. So yeah, that's what Legl does. That's what my focus is today.
Nice. And so you mentioned earlier and just there as well, talking about the client and customer experience, which is I think becoming, as you say, more and more prominent in the world we live in, with pretty much all of the products that we have and interact with, whether they're digital services or not. So how and again, you said that it seems that legal services are more focused now on that sort of customer service and customer and client experience. So what changes are being implemented in the ecosystem that you see that are driving that towards better customer experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a few things. And one is that firms are starting to think about the core service they provide is legal services, obviously. So they provide legal advice, etc. And I think that's always been seen in the past as like, that's what we're good at, that's what we do, but without actually necessarily thinking from soup to nuts, like what is the client's experience of going through that? So I go back to your phrase of witchcraft. I think that is a lot of people's experience. And I think firms are starting to understand that both from acquiring customers, retaining customers, but also from being able to upsell and to sort of think about, hey, you instructed us for this fundraising transaction, for example. Probably a few months down the line, you're going to need some corporate advice or you're going to need some employment advice. And it's really starting to think about what do you as a customer need through that whole journey? And I think what we're starting to see is hiring people like chief customer officers, never seen that before in legal, starting to invest in technology so that the end client feels like they're getting good value for money. There's a lot of client pressure on that, which is coming from other industries and is coming from an expectation that, no, you don't do all this stuff manually that you're charging me per hour or per minute for, when I know that can be automated. So it's forcing law firms to come up with new business models as well, because the billable hour, which you also referenced, is, I mean, that's pretty, that's the status quo. And I think that's hard to fully shift. But it is something that doesn't necessarily correlate with, am I paying for an outcome that I want to achieve as a client? Or am I paying for someone to like do some witchcraft work behind the scenes and I don't really know what that is? So I think we're starting to see like a slow but really fundamental shift in the way legal services are delivered. And technology is going to be really core across that shift to enabling lawyers to maintain their revenue streams and also deliver that client experience that their clients expect. And that's a hard triangulation, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. It's really difficult to try and get the balance right, I suppose, for all of those businesses out there, to try and make sure they're not cutting off their left or right arm, but whilst trying to sort of regenerate and make sure that they're future fit ultimately in terms of what they do.
Absolutely. And to your friend's example, there's some infrastructure there that can be misaligned sometimes incentive-wise, because if you're at the top of the pyramid and actually today is good for you, succession planning in that way really requires vision, and it requires a real thought to kind of the legacy of the firm and the sustainability of the firm. And we do see that the best firms really think about that very hard.
Yeah, they do. And so, stating the obvious here, but you're a female founder in a market that's full of, certainly the tech market is firstly full of mostly male predominantly tech founders. Also, then in legal services, which is also very a male dominated environment, you've sort of stacked against the odds. The odds are stacked against you to a certain degree. And you've had a number of successful fundraising rounds. You've obviously taken one business from strength to strength, now doing the same again with the second. So the obvious question is, what sort of challenges have you faced, coming up against you with all of that, I say, against you, to be so successful?
It's an interesting question. I get asked a version of this question every so often, and I don't really know how to answer it because I don't have anything to compare it to. I think I have I have a great team. I have a lot of resilience, and I think with building a business, I think if you've got a decent idea and a good team and you're thoughtful about how you execute on that, I think that you can find a path. I think you can find advantages in it as well in terms of being the underdog. But certainly I've had a lot of really good people around me, and I think actually a lot of really good investors that are really thoughtful about their own biases, but also around how to elevate people that might not otherwise get a look in, because pattern matching has had, often you're going to go for the guy that looks like you. And yeah, so I think I've been, mix of luck and tenacity.
I'll say probably the tenacity, most certainly, and I think that's it's a key virtue for any founder running a business. You've got to, you mentioned, be resilient, right? You're going to get lots of knockbacks, especially when you're doing things like sort of fundraising. You're knocking on a lot of doors, no matter what your background is. On the most part, you're spending a lot of time knocking on those doors, trying to get people to listen, because everyone's knocking on the same sort of doors. So having done, as I said a second ago, a few really successful fundraising rounds, what do you feel has sort of helped you to succeed?
I mean, that's a good question. I really like fundraising, which is unusual, I think, in some respects amongst founder friends. But I like the discipline of it. I like the feedback loops. I treat fundraising like a sales process, and I have a funnel, and I iterate on my messaging, and I really enjoy it. I like getting the feedback. I like getting the knockbacks in that time, because I think you learn about your business. And fundamentally, when you're building a business, you're in it, and every operational problem is you really think hard about it. But when you're selling a business to the fundraising market, they're looking at your business as an asset. And I find that like context switch really interesting. And it's a way of getting perspective on what you're doing. And so I don't know how to answer the question. I've been successful doing that. I think if your numbers are good, you're gonna do okay when you fundraise. But I also think there's tactics around treating it like a sales process that I've gotten better at over the years.
Yeah, and often it is, as you say, it's a sales process. You've got to sell yourself, your business, and as you say, if the numbers stack up, that's going to be a lot easier to get investment. But in early days, often you don't necessarily have sort of the numbers to play with. You're still trying to prove sort of market fit and all those sorts of things. So it's as you just said, about being able to sell the vision and what it is that you're trying to achieve and the problem you're trying to solve, and making sure you've got investors, that are aligned to that as well.
100%. The investor choice is a really important one.
And you've built some successful businesses so far. So you've obviously, you talked earlier about having a good team behind you, working with good people. So what's been your sort of key to building out that team? How have you gone about it, and what successes have you had in terms of being able to get a good team behind you? Because you're absolutely right, it's pivotal to running a good business.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely, I think it's the key thing. And how have I gone about it? By making lots of mistakes.
Good. Excellent.
Yeah, it's been a really big learning curve. And I think the hardest thing about sort of moving from, early startup stage to mid startup stage to scale up is and it's a cliche, but it's true. The people you need at those stages change. And so there's just like constant change, both in terms of what are you looking for when you hire someone? How are you scaling yourself up to be able to make sure that you're getting the right people at that stage, and that you're also making sure you're still the right person for that stage. So I think there's no magic sauce, and I honestly make a ton of mistakes. I have made a ton of mistakes in building that team, but what I really have gotten much better at is making sure that the one consistent is the values, making sure that people are values aligned, because you can have the most talented person in the world, but if they're not aligned with your core values, that person probably not going to work out in the short to medium term. And then sometimes the business just changes really quickly. And as long as you've got someone, one of our core values is agility. And actually, if you've hired the right people, they'll move with you if they can. And so, yeah, my big learning there has been really don't compromise on values.
Yeah, I think that's a really key thing as well, is making sure you've got your values set and they're out there for everyone to see, and then they know what they're getting on board with as well. So there's no sort of murky water or any other things like that, whereby they're suddenly going, well, actually, this isn't what I signed up to, and it all ends in disaster at that stage. So you've got to make sure your value proposition for your employees is absolutely on point. So I think a really valuable lesson for anyone who's listening, who's growing teams or a business, then making sure those things are aligned will help no end to creating some sort of success.
Definitely.
And so what do you envision next then for sort of Legl? Where do you go from here?
Yeah, so we were lucky enough to close a fundraise in 2022. And so we're really scaling up across our team. We're scaling up across our customer base. We're doing a lot of really cool product innovation. We're starting to experiment with international expansion. So we've got a big 2023 planned. And yeah, like every business, we're thinking a lot more about how do we do that in a really sustainable, positive unit economics way. How do we make sure that we're growing sustainably? There's a lot to do, and I actually like doing it in an environment of economic headwinds, because I like building a real business that's going to be there for the future.
Well, it will stand the test of time, won't it? And I think if you look at there's history to see that some of the the most successful businesses that are out there at the moment were started in economic uncertainty, and those are often the ones that can pull through, because there's a real value and a need for them if they're in that's, as you say, headwind of going against the grain.
Totally, definitely.
And for you, in terms of sort of where you sort of take the business, are you looking at sort of other products as well outside of sort of your core offering? You talked about sort of product innovation there. Is that something that's on the roadmap?
Yeah, so it feels like one of the challenges and opportunities of the legal space is that there is so much you can do from a technology perspective. And so one of the kind of key things we're doing at the moment is because our product is really workflow driven, it's really flexible, and it services a lot of different use cases. There's the direction for us is both really expanding on the use cases that we can deliver through our core platform, and also prioritizing some of the other really key pain points that we can solve within firms and do that in a way that's structured, strategic, and rigorous, so that we don't pull ourselves in too many directions at once. There is a huge amount of opportunity in the space. Amazing.
Well, Julia, I look forward to seeing even more success coming through 2023. It sounds like it's going to be a really busy year for you. I think, by the sounds of it, every year's a busy year for you. I don't think there's any quiet years, are there? You're not the sort of person that likes to sit still. I get the feeling. But yeah, I wish you all the success in everything you're doing, and look forward to watching eagerly for more sort of growth within the business and seeing what's next. And thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today to share some of your story.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.